in here. All right, there we go. Close enough. What's up, teammates? So I'm on my own today. I don't have Miss Rose with me for this one, but that's okay. That's all right. We're going to be talking about something that honestly I've messed up a few times as a parent, several times, but it's still something I think we really need to talk about to a certain degree, especially with school getting back started and stuff like that. Well, it's two things really. The first one being, sorry, locked up there. Let me start over. Two things I really want to talk about today, and this does relate to parenting and your kids. The first one being you have to let your kids fail. You've got to. You have to learn how to let your kids fail. You guys have heard that phrase, not my circus, not my monkeys, or whatever, right? You have to learn how to kind of close that off and let your kids fail without coming in and trying to save them all the time. And it really comes down to one thing. The shepherd doesn't get to design the sheep, right? And so I think a lot of parents get to this point where they try to design their kids and every little aspect about their kids and things like that. Now, you can provide an environment that's conducive to learning or certain skills or things like that. You can provide the right amount of stimulation to get skills or things moving in a certain area. But one thing that you absolutely cannot do is design every little aspect about your kids. If we look at neuroscience, for example, when your baby is born with over 400 psychological traits already there that will come out throughout their lives as they mature, as they grow, or as they run into certain type of stressors or situations. Those things are going to come out. Those are there when they're born, okay? Those are not things that you can force your child to learn. And yet something we run into all the time in here is, I want my kid to be great at school. I want my kid to be good at this. I want my kid to get straight A's, things like that. And so you try to force them to do the things that you think they need to do in order to get the success that you think they need to have. And if they start to fall behind or they start to fail, you tend to push them, right? Tend to push them down the path, whether or not they're ready for that path yet. And the thing that does is it just causes them to have less fun. It causes them to resent you more. It causes them to want to do the thing you want them to get good at less. And there's nothing more true I have heard than the phrase that if you want to help somebody get good at something, you have to make that thing fun for them. If it is fun for them, they will continue to do it. And when they start to feel like they're getting good at it, it will be even more fun for them. So let's say, for example, that you have a child and you want that child to grow up physically strong and coordinated and healthy, the play outside kind of kid and things like that. But if you force them down that path, like let's say they turn 4 or 5 years old and you force them to do traditional workouts with you, like curls or push-ups or sit-ups or things like that, they're going to get bored with that really, really, really fast, and they're going to give up on it real quick, right? Like I said, the shepherd doesn't get to design the sheep, right? Your baby's born with this beautiful mix of chromosomes and genes and tendencies and things like that are already in place. You can provide environments to help stimulate your kid to go in certain directions, but you cannot do it for them. You have to let them fail. You have to let them fail. Now, if you do want to raise that kid that's physical and strong and coordinated and things like that, great. Make the workout fun. So I can give you some examples of that, right? Get you a rope, like a 9-10 foot rope, lay it on the floor, lay it out on the floor, get your kid to lay on their back on one end of the floor, holding the rope. You hold the rope on the other end of the floor and have them climb and drag themselves to you. Things that are fun, right? There's all kinds of stuff out there you can get on fun coordination games for kids. One of the favorites we use is we'll get the kids in front of a wall or a pad, and we'll hold a piece of paper or something up really high, and then we'll drop it and try to get them to pin that thing to the wall. That's great for timing and coordination and things like that, but that's fun because it's a game. You're going to get a lot farther with your kids doing that than you are by forcing them to do push-ups and sit-ups and things like that, which they may be excited for a week or two, but as soon as it gets boring, they're not going to want to do that stuff anymore. And the same kind of thing happens when we talk about schoolwork and things like that. So if your kid plays a sport and you're watching a practice and you're like, my kid should be better at that, maybe they should, but let them fail. Let them fail. Right? If you jump in and try to save them every time, or force them to work on something to get better at it or whatever, and you make it boring, you don't make it fun, you're basically just pushing your kid away from the activity that was good for them that you wanted them to do in the first place, right? So we deal with this in the martial arts all the time. We'll have a kid, I'm just going to take a 7-year-old, for example, right? So I have a 7-year-old come into class and we'll be working on something, like we're working on throwing some punches on the pad or something like that. And too many times I've had parents come up to me, their kid's only done 5 or 6 classes, and then their parents come up to me and they give me this, well, I see that every time they throw their punches, their hand is slipping down like that, and I want to fix that. Great, I want to fix that too. But you do understand that I can't fix everything about the punch in the first few times they try it, right? That's not going to work. As a teacher, you have to understand what's important from the teacher's perspective. From the teacher's perspective, I should only fix one thing at a time because I don't want to overwhelm the kid. If I take a 7-year-old and I have him punch a pad and then I go, no, you got to start from here and you got to shoot straight out. You got to keep your elbow in. You got to hit with these 2 knuckles. You got to twist at the hip. You got to rotate your hip. You got to throw the hammer and then the chisel. If I get into all that detail with a 7-year-old right off the bat, they're going to leave that class and go, I'm never going to be able to throw a punch. And they want to quit, right? So they never will learn to throw a good punch. What's up, Ryan? On YouTube there. All right, so as a teacher, when you come up to me and say, well, I see they're still doing this, I'm always going to answer you with, yes, but they're better at this. And this is the thing I'm correcting them on. So when I deal with 7-year-olds, and we're talking about punching, usually the first thing I get them to do is just try to hit the pad with the right part of their hand, make sure they keep their thumb outside and wrapped around their fist and things like that. And I want to make sure that I break down and help one individual thing at a time. I'm about to answer that question, Mr. Cabero there. All right, so yeah, the point of this live is talking about parenting and kids. You don't get to design every aspect of your kid, just like a shepherd doesn't get to design every aspect of the sheep. They can provide a safe and conducive environment to healthy sheep, but they cannot plan and train every little tiny thing about that sheep. And as parents, we need to understand that we are the shepherds of our kids. We are not the designers, right? We don't have that much. We do have a lot of power over their growth, but we don't have that much power over their growth to where we can pick and choose what personality traits they should have or what they're going to be good at or what they're not going to be good at and things like that. The best we can do is shepherd them and guide them to make the right decisions. And the biggest part of that, getting back to the main part of this, is you have to be willing to let people fail. And this is something that I've messed up in the past with my son, because I used to work blue collar. I spent a lot of years in a blue collar thing where I got to fabricate stuff and make stuff. Something I was very good at, something I very much enjoyed doing, especially metal fabrication and stuff like that. But I realized around the time my son was 9 or 10 that I had a habit of when he would start something, he'd start a project, he'd be trying to make something, he'd be trying to build something. Instead of just coming in and offering some advice, I would come in and show him how to do it, and I would help him do it and things like that. And I realized that that was not helping him learn how to solve his own problems. It's important to let your kids learn how to fail. So something that happened just the other night, my son bought a nifty little thing for soccer training, right? But it's something that had to be put together. And I decided, nope, not this time. I'm not helping him. I'm not saving him. I'm not doing anything like that. So I'm going to have him do it himself. So I walked away and took a shower while he was building it. Stick a pin in that. Yeah, David, what do I think about controlling parents? I hate it. I hate it. And you can go back and listen to my last week's live podcast. I can't remember the title of it, but it was all about controlling behavior from parents. That was last week's topic. Last week's topic was about controlling parents. And that's why I'm kind of breaking off of that today. It's talking about letting your kids fail, right? Parents often try to control too much about their kids and their kids' lives, which just ends up leading to rifts and resentment by the time we get to the teenage years and stuff like that. It's one thing to offer advice and guidance. it's a whole different thing to try to control every aspect of your child's life. And that's just going to lead to them pulling away and stuff like that. But if you want to know more about that, go back to last week's episode. Search out hashtag Team Ed Talks anywhere you get your episodes. Last week's was on controlling parents. Now, let's talk about letting your kids fail. So I had my son, and I went to take a shower. I left him to build that. I took a long shower too. I wanted to give him plenty of time. 20 or 30 minutes later, I come out, and he is frustrated, like to the point of wanting to throw things, because he's got the thing mostly put together, but he was putting a net on it, which goes in really tight and has all these hooks on it. And I could tell by the way he was acting and the way he was talking, he was hoping I was going to jump in and save him, that I would show him how to do it, that I would kind of do it for him. And instead, I said, no, he's older now. He's a teenager now. He can figure this out himself. So the only thing I did do was point out that he didn't have the brackets spaced correctly and they needed all the brackets to go the same direction and that he should take them all off and start over. It took him another 45 minutes to get put together, and there was some throwing stuff and there was some cursing and all that. And when I was in blue collar, that was kind of part of it. So that was something that I did too. So I let him go and I let him handle it. But he ended up feeling so much better at the end when he was able to get it put together by himself than he would have felt if I'd stepped in and finished it for him, right? Which is something I've not been great about as a parent. And I think any caring parent has this want, when you see your kids failing at something, to jump in and help them or force them to do better in some way. But that's going to cause one of two problems. Either A, they're going to expect that no matter what they do, someone else is going to jump in and solve the problems for them, which is just not going to be the case through adult life. Or B, well, the other side of that is they're just not going to learn to solve their own problems, right? So they'll end up potentially becoming people that avoid trying to solve problems. But the way you make yourself valuable in the workspace, in careers or whatever else, that kind of thing, then the more valuable you want to make yourself, the better you have to be at solving problems. All right, I'm going to get off topic a little bit again for David over here. Should parents spank their children? I am pretty against that. And I'm not going to say I haven't done it when my son was much younger, but I'm quite against it. And I've made mistakes. But yeah, I kind of feel like if you're going to use physical harm to try to control somebody's behavior, that's not really going to help them make better decisions. And then on top of that, they're going to think that anytime someone does wrong by them, that the proper response is physical abuse. And that's just not the case, right? That's not the case. If someone insults me and I punch them in the face, I am likely going to end up in a ride in the backseat of a stranger's car with my hands tied behind my back, right? So I feel like it's important that we teach kids responsible ways to handle conflict, and we do that by handling conflict with them in responsible ways, right? So no, I'm not going to judge parents for what they do, but no, I don't really believe in the spanking thing. I really don't. I feel like that causes more issues and animosity than anything else. And one thing that I have noticed is that the more a child is spanked as a kid, the more likely they are to be physically violent and aggressive as an adult at the drop of a hat, right? And that, or they're going to be super anxious, right? One of the two. They'll either become kind of violent or aggressive, or they'll become super anxious and won't be very confident to talk to people or be themselves around people. So I didn't mean to kind of take a sidetrack there, but I had a question about spanking their kids, and that's my honest opinions on it, right? We want to model the behavior that we want our kids to be able to have. We want them to be kind and confident and capable individuals. So yeah, we have to let them fail, and we have to model that type of behavior with them when their behavior goes wrong. And I've done other episodes on how to manage behavior better, right? How to manage your kids' behavior and things like that. Like me personally, I use a 6-step process for that. And let's just say it doesn't involve any physical harm whatsoever, right? I don't want to teach my kid that it's okay to hit somebody if they do something wrong. And I don't want to teach my kid that they should be scared of somebody hitting them either. I mean, as a martial arts instructor, of course, we train defenses and things like that all the time. But I still don't feel like spanking is like a great thing in any way, shape, or form. I feel like, okay, so there were these studies done in the 70s. I bring them up on these podcasts all the time about kids and behavior. And basically what they did is they took like a control group and a regular group of kids, and they laid 3 toys out in front of them, right? And half the kids, they would say, hey, don't touch that because I said so, or you're going to get a spanking when we're done, but you can play with these other 2. And then half the kids, they say, hey, you can play with these 2 toys, but this third really cool toy, it's best if you don't play with that because you can get hurt in this way. It has a short in it. It could shock you. I don't remember the exact thing they used, but they basically were like, it could hurt you. This is how it could hurt you. And so it's really not safe to play with that when I'm not around. And what they found was the kids that were threatened with physical abuse, or the kids that were just told not to do something because I said so, the second the researcher left the room, they did the exact thing they were told not to do. Why? Because now they're curious. They want to know why they're not supposed to touch it. They want to know why they're not supposed to play with that thing, right? And you didn't tell them why. So they're going to test it out for themselves so they can figure out why. See what I'm saying? Now, the kids that were told, hey, you can play with this stuff, but don't touch this really cool toy because there's something wrong with it and you could get hurt, whatever it was they used. And like over 90% of those kids didn't touch the thing they were told not to touch. They made the decision for themselves not to touch the cool toy they were told not to touch because they were told why not to touch it, and they didn't want that thing to happen to them. And it wasn't a spanking, it was a general consequence. I think it was something about, hey, this toy robot has a problem with it, so if you touch it, it could shock you real bad, and so it's probably better not to do that. And most of those kids chose for themselves to do the right thing and follow the rules than the kids who were told not to do it just because, or not to do it under threat of physical violence. If you try to train a kid to not do something under the threat of physical violence, they won't do it around you, but they're definitely still going to do it. They're definitely still going to test it. Because let's face it, all kids at different ages, including teens, are really just practicing at being living creatures, right? They're practicing how to talk. They're practicing how to problem solve. They're practicing how to interact and sense the world around them, and they're constantly doing so through experimentation. If I touch this, what happens? If I throw this at that, what happens, right? So they're doing it through experimentation. So yeah, in the end, it's better to help your kid learn to make good choices for themselves than it is to force them to make good choices because you said so. It's always going to be better to get them to make the better choice for themselves by just being honest and open about what could happen, the real world consequences of not doing it. Oh, not doing your homework, you know your grades are going to slip and you could potentially be held back a year. Just want to let you know that that would be the consequence of it. Oh, your grades slip? Well, I bought you that PS5 because you were getting good grades. So as those grades slip, I'm going to take that back, until you can fix that up, right? An appropriate consequence to the action. But I really got off topic here. So let me go back and kind of reframe what we talked about in the beginning. What we talked about in the beginning was you cannot be afraid to let your kids fail. You do not get to design every little tiny aspect about your kids so that they turn out exactly the way you wanted them to. Your baby is born with 400 personality traits already ingrained in their genetics. Those personality traits will come out as they mature and grow up into the age of 23, 24 is where it finally starts to get solidified. And different things that happen to them, different situations will trigger certain genes to become active, and you'll start to see those personality traits come out. You can provide an environment that's conducive for learning. You can provide an environment that's conducive for being healthy, but you don't get to choose how your kid behaves in that environment, right? They're going to choose how they behave in that environment. The best you can do is guide them. You have to understand what's in your control and what's not. Other people, including your kids, are not in your control. What you do in response to what other people do, including your kids, that's in your control. Right? But what your kids do is not in your control, right? Yes, you should absolutely teach your children not to be afraid to fail. And that was actually going to be the final point of this video, right? It was talking about you have to let your kids be able to fail. 1, it will teach them better problem solving. 2, it will teach them better coping skills. Now, I'm not saying you can't give them some guidance. So when I saw my son struggling to put together the thing the other day, I decided, no, I'm not going to step in and do it for him. But what I will do is take a look at it because I'm an experienced blue-collar fabricator. So I'll take a look at it and I'll go, hey, these brackets are backwards. Hey, your brackets aren't spaced right. You should do it like this. But I'm not doing it for you, and I walk away. right? You have to learn to let your kids fail. If you bring your kid into a martial arts class or a soccer practice or a basketball or whatever, and your kid is really struggling with something and not doing the drill right, going home and making them do it 1,000 times or 100 times or whatever is just going to make them have less fun at doing it. You have to be okay with letting your kids failure. Your kid's failure is not your failure. Let me say that again. Your kid's failure is not your failure. It's theirs. So you can be supportive when they feel bad for failing. You can be supportive. You can offer guidance, right? But you have to be okay with letting your kids fail. So if you see them messing up something in their martial arts class or whatever, on the way home, don't be giving them the, oh, well, you should have done it like this, and you have to go way harder, and you have to do this, and when we get home, we're going to do it for another 20 minutes till you get it right. They're no longer having fun with it at that point. And if they're not having fun with it, they're going to stop training it. They're going to stop practicing it, and then how do you expect them to get better? And that's the thing I run into. I started to give the punch thing earlier. We run into this with young kids all the time. Look, in my 4 to 6 year old classes, no, they don't necessarily spar. I mean, kind of. They have their own kind of way of sparring. But what they're focused on is proprioception, kinesthetic awareness, balance. They're focused on a little bit with technique. They're focused on the ability to align their joints and things like that. Basic exercise, strength, endurance, stuff like that. They're working on the fundamental coordination needed to learn the techniques. So when they get to my 7, 8 year old class, we put more emphasis on techniques. But when I'm teaching a technique, I pick one thing at a time, and I train my instructors to do this too. It doesn't matter how bad that technique they throw is. Pick one thing to fix. So they're throwing that weird punch sideways like this. So the first thing I'm going to tell them to fix, I'm going to say, no, put your hands up right here. And I just want you to go straight forward with it. And you know what they do? They put their hands up and I go, all right, shoot it straight forward. And they go like this. I say, no, we don't want to pull that hand back. Just go straight forward with it. So I focused on getting them to go straight forward. And as long as they make improvement, even if the punch is still wrong, but as long as I make improvement, I say, all right, good job. Keep focusing on throwing them straight. Then the next class they come in, if they're still throwing them at least straight out from here, all right, now we'll talk about the elbow or the hand drop or the connection point or whatever. But my instructors are only going to train and teach one thing at a time. Too many parents want their kids to be great at something the first 10 times they try it, so then they go home and try to self-teach their kid, but they give them too many corrections at once, and then the child gets overwhelmed. And once that child is overwhelmed, they're not going to perform well. They're simply not going to perform well. So when you're sitting here watching your kid in the martial arts class, or you're sitting there watching the soccer practice, let your kid fail. Let your kid mess up. It's not your failure. Don't feel bad because your kid failed at something. Let them fail. Let them learn that failure is a stepstone to success. Let them feel that it hurts a little bit to fail, so maybe they'll try a little harder to not fail next time. Or let them fail so often they get accustomed to it, and so it doesn't bother them. My best students, the best students I've ever had in here, were not the most talented people. They were the people that came in and failed the most, and they just kept trying. But they kept failing, and they kept trying it for the first 2 years. They kept failing at everything. Not the best puncher, not the best kicker, not the best at takedowns, struggle with technique, struggle with headlock escape, struggle with this, struggle with that, struggle with stance, struggle with balance, whatever it is. But I love working with those students. You know why? Because I can slowly fix one thing at a time with them, one thing at a time. And across 6 months or 2 years or 4 years, that one thing at a time builds up to everything. And then that kid ends up becoming some of the best black belts I've ever had. And it's because they're not afraid to fail. Because people let them fail, and they were used to failing, so they were okay with it. And so they kept trying because failure didn't stop them. Failure didn't upset them. They just failed, laughed about it, went, all right, well, I'll try to do it better next time, and kept going, right? Those are the people that, given enough time, end up with the most skill. Too often, I have people come in here, kids come in here, and they got a raw amount of talent, and we compliment on the talent. Great job. But the very first time we teach them something they struggle with, they get so down on themselves because they hate failing so much. And the problem is they've been taught that failure is a bad thing. And so the first time that I teach them something that challenges them and they fail at it 3 times in a row, they get angry, they get frustrated, they throw a tantrum on the floor, they run to their parents, they get upset, and now it's, I'm going to quit. I'm no good at it. I'm going to quit. Dude, you tried 3 times. The kid next to you is doing worse than you are, and he doesn't seem to be having a problem, and I'm still helping him, but that kid's going to stay with it because he's not afraid to fail, because he's used to failing. So he's not afraid of it, right? Let your kids fail. Let them get used to it. Don't make them afraid of it. So I 100% agree with what you're saying there. I'm sorry, I was answering a comment on YouTube. Kids that fail with a good attitude become adults with better coping skills. That's absolutely true. Now, I'm not saying, look, your kids need to be okay with failure. I'm not saying don't guide them to improve, right? What I'm saying is don't berate them or hit them when they fail at something. And don't come in and save them either, right? So your kid says, I want to do this for a school project. And in your head you go, oh, I think that's going to be a lot harder to do than you think it is. So what? Let them try. Let them try. Let them fail. At least at the end, they're going to be proud of themselves because they tried, because they went all out for it. And I tell my competition team this all the time. My competition team competes in 3 events. One of those events is called Extreme Forms. And this is where they get to make up sort of their own kata, right? And it gets to include gymnastics and dance and trick kicks and classic traditional movements and stances. It gets to blend a lot of stuff together. Now, a lot of studios that have the best competitors in the world in that division, what they do is they teach their entire studio the same form and then kind of let the kids, add difficulty to it through gymnastics movements, right? I hate that. You know why? Because the kids going to that school, they get taught the same thing as everybody else, every other top competitor in the sport. And sure, the forms are well designed for winning, but the kids don't ever get to take the time for creative expression to build something themselves. So my kids, I'll show them a base level form, but I'll say, I don't want you competing with that form. I want you coming up with your own. I want you adding your own flair to it, add your own piece to it. And I tell my kids, they see other kids win at these divisions by doing oversimplified stuff that's way too easy. I tell my kids, forget the win. Go all out. Take the big risks. Do the tricks no one else is doing. Do the really risky maneuvers that look awesome when you pull it off. It's way above and beyond what anyone else is doing. And yeah, you're going to fail more often, but when you do hit it, it's going to feel real good because no one else at that tournament can hold a candle to what you just pulled off, right? So I train my kids to go all in with risk. And don't be afraid of the failure, right? Go all out with it. Talented people are some of the hardest to work with. Narcissistic parents, do I think they're the problem? Not necessarily. I feel like the word narcissist gets thrown around way too much because, yes, narcissism is a thing, but you have to understand that it's a sliding scale. So a true narcissist is someone on the extreme end of a sliding scale. Fact of the matter is, we all have a narcissism score. We are all a little egotistical. We can only look at the world from our own point of view. We can attempt to put ourselves in the shoes of other people, but we can truly only look at it from our point of view, right? And so in the end, I feel like the term narcissist gets thrown around a lot. Now, my mother was a clinical narcissist. Like, as in, she could not, for the life of her, consider other people in any decision, even her own child, right? That's just the way she was. But there are some people, all of us have a bit of narcissistic tendencies. That doesn't make us a narcissist, right? So I feel like that word gets thrown around too much these days. And as someone diagnosed ADHD, I also feel the same way about ADHD. I feel like that's something that gets thrown around too much. Yes, we all have some symptoms of ADHD. It's a sliding scale. But to be like clinically said to have, oh, he has ADHD, you have to be past a certain point on the scale, right? A certain amount of symptoms and past a normal degree. Everybody experiences some symptoms of ADHD. Everybody experiences some symptoms of depression. That doesn't automatically mean you're depressed. It doesn't automatically mean you have ADHD. It doesn't automatically mean you're a narcissist just because you have narcissistic tendencies. So that's the first thing I'm going to say about that. As far as what the problem is when it comes to failing, I think it's a fear of judgment more than it's narcissism. Right? So I think a lot of parents tend to jump in and try to save their kids because they don't want to see their kids fail. And I think that's more coming out of a place of compassion or fear of being judged if your kid fails or things like that than it is narcissism, if that makes sense. So you have to learn to let your kids fail, right? You notice your kids aren't doing their homework. Obviously, as a good parent, you're going to try to get them to do their homework. You're going to encourage them to do their homework. You're going to motivate them to do their homework. You let them know what the consequences are to not doing their homework. But in the end, if they're going to fail, let them fail. If they're going to fail, let them fail, right? Hey, I thought you had a test coming up. Why are you playing video games? Shouldn't you be studying? Oh, well, I'll be fine, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but if you fail that test, don't come to me crying. If you fail that test, it's on you, right? And then they fail the test. They don't do good at the test. Well, there you go. You realize that those grades are going to have something to do with whether you get into college or not, especially for high school kids and teenagers and stuff like that, right? But stop jumping in and saving them. Because jumping in and saving them looks like one of two things. It either looks like you get in there and do it with them, which almost always turns into you kind of doing a lot of the work for them. Not good. Or it turns into you forcing them to do it themselves by making them sit still for hours at a time and do it. And that's going to build up resentment. And that's going to lead to them not even telling you when they have work they need to do, or trying to hide their school grades from you, or things like that, right? So that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. And if you've never, I'm going to take it, David, that you've not seen any of my previous podcast episodes, but I've done many about the difference, consequence versus punishments. I am very anti-punishment. I am very pro-consequence, meaning that I'm not going to punish my kid for breaking this rule, but there is going to be a consequence for not doing it. Oh, you didn't train for that test? The consequence is that you fail. And if you fail the test or get a failing grade, then maybe there's something that is a distraction that I'm going to then take, right? So let's say, because I finally let my son have a phone at 13. When he got the phone, it was under the condition of the consequence of certain things. If your physical training slips, if your schoolwork slips or something like that, because you're being distracted, then that phone is mine. He paid for the phone, but I'm like, look, I'm going to take the phone as a consequence if your grades slip or something like that. So then when it comes down to it, if his grades slip, look, you knew the consequence. The consequence was, that's my phone now until your grade gets back up, right? Or at least until you're putting more effort into it. Now, I don't base mine on grades. I know I just gave that example. I don't base my consequences on grades. I base my consequences on effort. So what I say, and the deal I actually made with him was, if you're not putting in the effort to finish your work at a decent time and a decent ability, then I'm going to take the phone until you're finishing your work or putting the time into your work that you need to. That was actually the deal I made with him. It wasn't about his grades. I don't like basing things on results, and I've done a podcast episode on this too. You should base your praise and consequences on effort rather than result, right? On the work they put into getting the grade instead of the grade itself, right? Because if they put a lot of work into it and they still get a C, praise them for the effort of putting a lot of work into it, right? I'm not going to give a consequence for that. But if hey, you got that test coming up, I haven't seen you study. All right, then you fail the test. All right, look, man, the consequence of that, I don't care about the grade you got on the test, but you didn't even put any work into it. So therefore, the consequence is I take the phone, right? And I don't do long-term things. I say a week or 2 weeks. I keep it real short, right? I believe in discipline as well, but I believe in self-discipline, which is, I feel like instead of disciplining our kids as in punishing them, I feel like we should discipline our kids as in self-discipline, as in teach them how good it feels to always try your best, even if your best isn't perfect, even if your best fails, right? I teach discipline as to always try your best at all times, even if you don't feel like it. Your best may not be fantastic today, but as long as you keep trying your best, you're going to make improvements, right? So that's what I base discipline on. I base discipline on self-discipline, as in doing the best that you can so that you're creating a good routine, a healthy routine that is going to help you improve over time. I do not expect my child to improve overnight, and you shouldn't either. That's the problem we run into with parents here all the time. I've had parents come up to me recently talking about their 7 and 8-year-olds sparring for the first time. Well, I really wish my kid would just keep their elbows in and keep their hands up or shoot those straight line punches or this or that or the other. And I say they will. They will. But right now, they're first learning to spar. So when we're working technique, we're fixing one thing at a time. Then they get into sparring. In sparring, we're not focused on technique, right? What we're focused on is tactics, at least with the little kids. Now, as we get older, technique is more important, right? But with the little kids, we focus on tactics and things like that. And, well, I wish they do this. I say, yeah, as a coach, I wish they would do that too. But I'm not going to overwhelm them by trying to tell them that everything they're doing is wrong. Because if I try to correct everything they're doing all at once, and we already talked about this, if I try to correct everything they're doing at once, we're going to have problems. So if my biggest problem is they keep opening their hands up, then that's the one thing I'm going to correct. Make sure you keep your hands closed. And by the way, we're a studio that focuses on, it's not MMA. We don't really do rules like that. So we have kickboxing and grappling and clinch work and elbows and knees and takedowns, and it all goes into it. But we don't play by MMA rules. Why? MMA rules are not conducive to self-defense. They're simply not. In MMA, on the ground, you cannot kick an opponent above the waist. So if I'm on the ground and my opponent is standing, I can't kick them in the face. I can't kick them in the belly. I can't kick them in the groin. I can't even kick them in the knee, right? MMA rules. If I roll over into turtle guard and go face down on the mat, they can't hit me in the back of the head. But in the real world, I can absolutely stomp you in the back of the head. So we don't follow MMA rules. I don't know why I got on that topic. But I think the point I was trying to make was, you fix one little thing at a time. And sparring is a beautiful thing for letting people see their own mistakes without having to point them out. Oh, I just got tagged in the head. Why did I get tagged in the head? Maybe because you didn't get your guard. Oh, I remember the reason we bring up kickboxing. Because I get parents all the time that try to get their kids to square up and hands here. That is very bad for self-defense. This is great for boxing. When you got big pads on your hands, it's terrible for self-defense, right? Because if I get hit in the hand, boom, I still got hit, right? So when we're talking about self-defense, the hands are out here, right? Now, if we're really talking about self-defense, I should have them turned in too, right? Outside of the hands, so I'm not giving up vital veins and the like. Now, I know I'm getting into martial arts here, but just let me finish my point. So I get parents all the time, you should square up and put your hands up. No, because against a kicker, you just opened up your groin, you opened up your leg, you opened up your stomach, and you opened up your chest, and you opened up your face, right? So I have that. Then parents come to me and go, oh, I wish my kid would stop spreading their arms. Well, you shouldn't have taught them to keep their hands right there, right? You shouldn't have taught them to stand square, because standing square makes you a big target. That's great for boxing. It's great for boxing. And I love boxing. I love the sport of boxing. But you need to understand, if you're boxing, you're boxing. If you're fighting, you're fighting. If you're doing MMA, you're doing MMA. But if you're doing self-defense, that's a whole different ballgame, right? So when we mix kickboxing into it, you have to understand that a kickboxer's stance is sideways with the front arm low at kicking distance. When you move slightly within kicking distance, your guard becomes middle, right? Then when you get up to boxing distance, then you turn a little bit more square and bring your hands up. So it's important. Like as a coach, I know all this stuff and I'm teaching all this stuff and I can give you all the reasons and physics behind it and all that. What happens though is I got parents that want their kids to be perfect in their first few weeks, so they're teaching them bad habits. And I get parents to teach the kids bad habits while I'm trying to break the kids of those bad habits, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, my son is in some of my videos. That's true. Trust is important. It's hard to build trust with our kids. Students are not. If we constantly overwhelm them with stuff they're doing wrong, that's absolutely right. What martial arts do I teach? That is a phenomenal question. I feel like martial arts is martial arts. I feel like modern martial arts should evolve. Like, look, originally we used to talk about martial arts in terms of self-defense. The sad part is American martial arts didn't keep up with the rest of the world. Here's what I mean by that. When the Korean and Vietnam War and things like that were going on, there was a lot of military people over there who were training in studios over there, right? And they were training for usually a year at a time, maybe 2 years max. And then they were coming back and trying to teach a system that takes 6 or 7 years to learn, where they only learned a year or two worth of it, right? And so this is where American karate got a bad name. And American Taekwondo started to get a bad name too. Because a lot of people for about 2 decades, a lot of studios were only teaching some basic stuff that they learned overseas without learning the rest of it. And that's why forms get a bad name. Go to 10 different martial arts studios in the area that do kata or form and ask the instructors if they do Bonkai application. 9 out of 10 of them will either not know what you're talking about or will say no. That therein lies the problem. Forms are not meant to be a pattern of movements put together in a dance. They're meant to be sectioned off into combinations used for very specific attacks and self-defense scenarios. That's what it is. So when you see something goofy in a form, like a square block, right? It actually has a good use. You walk up, grab or push, I knock your hands out of the way, close to the center, right? It has a combative application. But people see people do this in a form, and the person who's doing it doesn't understand the application, and the person watching it doesn't understand the application, and therefore it becomes, well, that's stupid. Karate's stupid for fighting. I get it, because karate has a bad name. But real karate is great in a fight. right? I got an argument with a guy the other day. So karate's 80% kicks. No, it's not. It's 20% kicks at best. And old school karate, most of the kicks are focused below the belt. Do they practice kicking to the head? Yeah, because the higher you can kick and the harder you can kick high, the harder you can kick low. That was the reason for it. Or people see people doing traditional forms and getting those deep low stances. What are those deep low stances good for in a fight? They're not. They're not meant for that. We're doing that to train our hip joints for strong kicks. That's why we're doing it, right? So, no, I'm not saying karate is a scam. I'm saying find a great instructor. Find someone who understands the concept of bunkai applications. Find someone who understands the self-defense applications, the combatives part of it. And find a studio that does combatives. The problem is there's too many studios that just do pad work, sparring, and forms, and that's it. But they never do bunkai applications. They never do active protection applications. They never show what half of the stuff in the form is actually meant to represent. So no, it's not a scam. You just have to find a good instructor. So what martial art do I teach? That's an awesome question. I started off at 6 years old, 7 years old, training in Kenpo, Japanese Kenpo specifically, because there's also Chinese Kenpo. I was training in Japanese Kenpo. I did that for about 2 years. That instructor got sick, had to quit teaching. About a year after that, I got into, what did I do next? That's judo. I did judo. I did a year of judo. I had a lot of fun with that, but then something happened there. I had to leave that. The next one I got into was, oh gosh, Shotokan karate. The next one I got into was Shotokan karate, which, by the way, was pretty wildly different from Japanese Kenpo karate. Thing is, there's dozens of styles of karate that all teach different things. But the body can only move in so many ways, so there's a lot of crossover, right? Then as a young teen, I did a bit of Muay Thai, had a lot of fun with that while there was a place around that I could do it. Then I got out of martial arts. I was homeless at 16. There was a lot of other stuff going on. Got back into martial arts as an adult around the age of 23, and I got into Taekwondo. And I was not training at a good Taekwondo school, but I liked the people I trained with, so I continued to go. When they recognized that I had about 7 years of experience in other martial arts, they started having me teach some of that stuff, which was a lot of fun, right? So I stayed with them for a good long while. As I was training with them, I made a deal with a jiu-jitsu studio. I trained there for 3 years, right? And then I trained at another one for another 2 years. Started back at white belt, went over again. Then I was also doing Taekwondo, continually do that time, and went back to Muay Thai for a little while and started training in Capoeira. So I've got several arts under my belt. Now, what do I teach? I teach what works, okay? So our main base forms are ITF Taekwondo, combative Taekwondo forms. Yeah, I like those Taekwondo forms because they have a lot of really good combative bunkai to them. I know bunkai is a Japanese word, and I'm talking about Taekwondo as a Korean art. I get it. I blend a lot of stuff together, man. And it's going to depend on your hips too. So for people that have trouble rotating their hip inward, I will teach them a Taekwondo style round kick. For people that don't struggle to rotate their hip inward, can go inward or outward, I'll teach them a karate style round kick. For people that struggle with having their knee rotate too far inward, they can't rotate it outward, I'll teach them a Muay Thai round kick. They're all round kicks though, right? So our striking is built from Taekwondo, karate, and Muay Thai. Our grappling is mostly built from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our active protection, including joint locks, throws, and no takedowns, that kind of thing, is mostly built out of judo. And our traditional forms are based in ITF combative Taekwondo. So what I teach is a mixed curriculum of martial arts, but I do not teach MMA because MMA is not a style. MMA is a competitive rule set. It's a set of rules to compete by. That's it. Just like Kyokushin is a set of rules to compete by. Just like Olympic Taekwondo is a set of rules to compete by. Just like boxing is a set of rules to compete by. And kickboxing is a set of rules to compete by. And point sparring is a set of rules to compete by. None of those are styles. They are sports practiced by people who train in the styles. Okay? So MMA is a sport. It is not a style. Right? And anyone that tries to tell you otherwise doesn't understand the concept of mixed martial arts. As in, this is a sport rule set that is designed to get its participants to mix styles of martial arts together to see how they all interplay with each other. That was the point of MMA, and I'm a big fan of that point, right? I'm a big fan of that kind of thing. I teach a mixed curriculum, but what I'm not a fan of is people saying that MMA is the be-all, end-all to self-defense. Really? Because a lot of MMA studios are going to teach you turtle guard. Turtle guard is great in sport. It sucks for self-defense, so I don't teach turtle guard at all, even in my jiu-jitsu basics. When I teach jiu-jitsu techniques in the studio, I don't teach a full jiu-jitsu curriculum. I only teach a handful of basics that are effective against a striking opponent. I do not teach jiu-jitsu techniques that are great for sport jiu-jitsu but don't work when someone's hammer fisting you in the head, right? Does that make sense? So we pressure test our things under a self-defense environment where no rules apply, and then we teach the things that are effective more than 50% of the time with more than 50% of our students, right? So that's it. Do I watch MMA? Not that much. No, not that much. Dude, I have studied and done theory and done fighting and competed myself for so many years. I'm not going to spend my off time watching or doing what I do professionally. Does that make sense? I already do it professionally. I'm not going to spend my time watching it. I'm not going to spend my free time watching it. I'm going to spend my free time with my family. Now, I got way off topic here, but when it comes to this kind of thing, what I'm really talking about is let your kids fail. Let your kids fail on their own. Let them feel the consequences. Let them learn what it feels like to fail. Do not jump in and do it for them. Do not jump in and save them. Give them some guidance. Give them some advice. But if your kid's on the floor doing martial arts, your job is to support. So if they're messing a bunch of stuff up, your job is not to correct that. Your job is to be supportive and point out the successes that they've had and point out the good things that they're doing and the effort that they're putting in, and let them know that they will continue to get better if they keep putting in that effort, right? Your job is to be supportive. My job is to correct them. My job is to teach them one thing at a time about their punch or whatever to get better. Here's the thing not a lot of people realize. The punch is not the simplest, most basic technique in martial arts. It is the hardest one to master. The absolute hardest one. Y'all ever heard of the hammer and chisel theory? Where the shoulder and the hip, those are the hammer, the hand is the chisel. So the hand and the arm are not supposed to be tense. I get this all the time. Get people ask me all the time. I watched this MMA fight the other night, and one guy took mount, and he was hitting the other guy, and he hits the other guy like 80 times, and the other guy was just fine. But then in the next match, one guy took a light shot, and he went down, and he was unconscious. Why? Well, because you can't generate power with your arms. Your arms and triceps are not strong enough to generate enough power to hurt somebody. Not really. So if you get up on top of somebody and you're swinging with your arms, you're not doing any damage. You have to swing with your shoulder, swing with your hip. That's the hammer. The hand is just the chisel. The arm should be relaxed, right? The arm should be totally relaxed. Hammer up here. The hand is the chisel. So you have to make sure that you understand how to strike to be able to see that. Have I ever competed in MMA? Yes, I have. Have I ever competed in bare knuckle fighting? Yes, I have. You name it. Muay Thai, yes. I've competed. Point sparring, yes, I've done that too. I very much enjoy the sport. As I've gotten older, I have stopped competing in hard contact though. About 8 years ago, 9 years ago, stopped competing in hard contact. Why? Because here's the thing, the more hits you take to the head, the easier you are to concuss. Okay, there's no such thing as conditioning the head. So the more hits you take to the head, the easier you are to concuss, which is why most MMA fighters will tell you this. It's not a good idea to spar hard in your training. You should spar light. Hit the pads hard, spar light, then you're healthy for your fight and you're not easily concussed by the slightest hit to the head, right? My problem was when I was doing the full contact stuff, I took too many shots to the shoulder, I took too many shots to the head, and I just can't take the hits anymore. If I take a hit to the head like that now, my neck gets messed up for like 6 or 7 weeks, right? So no, I don't compete anymore. Used to, but no. And I'm not very competitive. I don't care to. The only reasons I competed back then were because I thought I had to, because I was an instructor. So I thought I had to prove us. And it turns out that was completely unnecessary, right? So anyway, back to parenting, back to kids. Let your kids fail, right? You can't design every tiny detail about your kids. You know, like the shepherd can't design what color the sheep is, right? So the best you can do is provide an environment that's conducive for the skills you want them to learn, but you can't force them to learn those skills, right? You can't do it for them. Let them solve their own problems. Let them fail on their own, okay? Let them fail on the merits. Do not be so bothered when your kid fails something. That's their failure, not yours, right? They might be bothered by it, and that might bother you, but don't jump in and save them. Learning how to cope with failure and those emotions is an important part of growth and development. Don't rob that from your kids. Now, I got a class to go to, so I'll see you guys again. Be the best teammate you can be. Be the best at being you.